Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1377. The topic is training and the title is Identifying a Good Program. So we've talked a little bit about this before, and we've talked about different programming aspects, and I'll be sharing a lot of podcasts with you. But I wanted to talk about it again because it did come up again. So this isn't uncommon, unfortunately, that when someone reaches out, whether it's, they heard of us through the podcast or otherwise, they'll reach out and we talk about training, we talk about nutrition, and one of the recent examples is somebody shared with me what their current training program was. And we decided to go ahead and start working together because they were having some issues with the past programming coach. So we started working together, but I thought it would be good to kind of talk through what they were experiencing. So that way, if you're experiencing some of the same things, you might, benefit from knowing that it's not necessarily you that the problem, that the problem is, it might be your programming. So this client, they had, this is the programming they had before me, is their coach gave them a 5-day a week program, but yet the client could only train 4 days a week. And I talked with them about this, and they said that they had told the coach that, and the coach said, well, this, I believe in a 5-day program. This is what I have my athletes do. And it's like, well, if a person can't do that, if they can't meet, 5 days, how do you do it in 4? And if you don't think they can do it in 4, don't take their money. Don't work with somebody if you don't think they can do it, differently. So the coach was unwilling to change their programming to 4 days. So what the client had to do, and they had to do this on their own because the coach didn't give them advice, is they just took the work of the 5th day, split it apart, and put it at the end of the previous 4 days, which was not good. Now, it was the best idea they had, but the reason why that wouldn't have been optimal would be is that day 5 had its own kind of purpose. It would almost be like if you took like a chest training day, and you took, say the workout was supposed to be, chest flies into barbell press, into dumbbell press, and then maybe ending with another flies thing. So maybe you start with, dumbbell flies and you end with cable flies. So they did the dumbbell flies on Monday. They did the barbell bench on Tuesday. They did the dumbbell bench on, Thursday. And then they did the, cable flies or whatever on Thursday. So they split it up, but it would not have anywhere near as much of an positive effect, being all broken up like that. And it didn't match whatever they were doing on those days anyhow. So it was kind of it was best of what they knew to do, but it was a bummer that their coach didn't give them more help. So essentially they had a program that didn't match their schedule. They also had a program that didn't have some of the equipment they had. So the program called for a seated calf extension, which they didn't have. It called for a seated hamstring curl, which they didn't have at their gym. And there was a couple other things, but that was frustrating. So they didn't have, for example, a chest supported row. So the client switched it out for dumbbell seal rows, which is a pretty good choice. They didn't have a seated hamstring curl, so they did lying hamstring curl instead. Pretty good choice. But it was a bummer that the program wasn't specific to the equipment that person had available. Then also they had started out great in the program. They felt strong, saw some increases, but then they kind of felt like they stagnated and they are kind of feeling stuck. And that's what led them to reaching out to me, was they had wrote to their coach and said hey, I'm really feeling stuck on these lifts. What should I do? And the coach only reached out once every 2 weeks. They only heard from their coach twice a month. And for example, in one of the feedbacks he showed me, one of the exercises was written as doing 3 sets of 10 reps, but yet they were told to increase weight or reps each week. So the client was like, well, how long do I increase reps for before I increase weight? So for example, if I do 3 sets of 10 in the first week, I can't add any weight by the second week because I haven't really gotten stronger in 1 week, not significantly stronger. So then they do 3 sets the next week. Maybe with that same weight, they can do a set of 11, but then they only get like 9 because they burned themselves out in the first sets of 11. Maybe the following week they can get 11, 11, 10. Maybe the next week they get 12, then 11, then 9. And they're like, well, how long do I keep progressing in reps? I'm assuming I progress in reps until I feel like I can move up in weight. But do I move up in weight on the first set, but even if I have to reduce weight on the second and third set? Or do I not wait to move up in weight until I can move up on all 3 sets? And they were just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. So they wrote that to their coach, and all the coach wrote back was, increase weight when you can. That was it. And it's like that was definitely not good enough of an answer. Wasn't detailed enough. And it was actually at that answer that this person decided to leave that trainer, leave that coach, because that was a trash answer basically. And then also the programming was trash. So for example, one of the bench press focused workouts, they were supposed to do, it just wrote chest warm up. That was it. And they had earlier in the program, there was like ideas for them to warm up, but it wasn't specific. And then they were supposed to do flat barbell bench press for 3 sets of 10, incline barbell bench press for 3 sets of 12, decline barbell bench press for 3 sets of 8, and then weighted dips. And it's like, oh my good Lord, there's so many things wrong with that. But they were like, well, if I do the 3 sets of 10 on the flat bench, I do 3 sets of 12 on the incline bench. By the time I go to the decline, I can't do anything. By the time I go to the dips, my elbows just hurt and I'm worn out and I'm tired and I can barely do my own body weight. So it was just a crazy amount of volume of really heavy press work. So it was just it's not optimal. It's not really good quality writing. So the worst of all of it is this person was paying for the programming, and it was labeled supposed to be personalized. So they were a male power lifter, and the program that they bought from the coach said, male power lifter, this person's name, and the coach said, like, this would be the best program for you and how you can get your strongest and biggest, and you'll be able to reach like state records, and they had all this hype, but it was not actually personalized. So it was no different than anybody else's program that would have bought from him that was a male powerlifter, and he wasn't getting any personalization to anything. He'd been working with the coach for a couple months, but yet there was no details, there was no feedback, there was nothing. So that's unfortunate. It bums me out because here's somebody who was dedicated in wanting to do it. They were going to put in the effort in the gym. They were going to put in the effort in the kitchen, make sure they were eating right. They were paying money for it, and they got absolute trash. So I'm bummed for you. I'm sorry for you. So I want to try to save some other people from it. So what I wanted to do today was just do a quick kind of overview of like what should be in a good program. So good programs should have, and we're going to go through a couple of these aspects here. But one is having performance ranges for daily variance. And what I mean by this is you're not going to come in every day feeling like it's the best day ever or the worst day ever, So if you have a super horrible, stressful Monday and you do what you can, you get through the workout, and then the next week you feel pretty good. You had a great weekend, you got an extra sleep a little bit, maybe you even had Monday off work, and all of a sudden you come in, you're totally fresh, you crush everything, but then the next week you're back to, not a crazy stressful day, but you did have work that day, so all of a sudden you can't meet the numbers that you had the previous week. So you're having all these highs and lows. That's normal. That's life. Welcome to life. So it's good to have a program that accounts for that in some way. So there should be some kind of range for performance. Now this can be, using rep ranges. So instead of the program saying 3 sets of 10, you could say 3 sets of 8 to 12. And on that day, if everything feels, like light, you can go a little heavier and try to go max out the weight you can do for 8 reps. Or maybe it feels like crap and you're like, I'm going to stay lighter, but see if I can get 11 or 12 reps. So it gives you a little bit of variance in there. There's also percentage ranges. Sometimes programs are written as doing, 90% for 4 sets of 1. And you're like, well, 90% feels like 110% today. It feels awful. So maybe your program is better off having, say 85 to 90% for 4 sets of 4 sets equaling 8 reps total, something like that. So maybe you can get a set of 3, a set of 3, then a set of 2, something like that. but it should have some variance in it. There's also ways in which you can write like RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, which just means like on a ranking scale of 1 to 10, how hard does it feel? There's also RIR, which is reps in reserve, which is another way to kind of control intensity. And what RIR, reps in reserve, means, you might say, do 3 sets of 8 to 12 with 2 RIR. And what that means is you want them to do 8 to 12 reps, but they're going to stop when they can still do 2. So there's 2 reps in reserve. Often this is when you want them to be very careful with technique. You don't want them to overexert themselves. I'll use this in different phases of prepping before strength competitions or doing different type of pre-exhaust work with bodybuilders and stuff. So there are different reasons why you would use all of these things, but what they allow you to do is to have some variance to your performance that day, if you're having a good day, bad day, rough day, whatever the day might be. So we do have podcast number 982, which you can listen to. You can listen to get more information on. But podcast 982 is a training podcast titled Why Programs Should Have Rep and Percentage Ranges and How to Use Them. So that will also explain how to make ranges. So if your program is trash and it has, like, for example, 3 sets of 10 or 3 sets of 12 or 3 sets of 8, you can listen to podcast 982 and learn how to make ranges out of that. Same thing with percentages. We talk through how to make ranges out of those as well. So you can kind of fix your own programming for a sense. Then we also should have progressions from workout to workout. The progressions should be very kind of descriptive as to what they want you to do. So, for example, if your goal is strength progression, more commonly you're going to see the program want to push you to try to move heavier weight loads. Now, this isn't always the case, but I'm just going to kind of use as a general concept here, is if the program is wanting you to go to heavier, it should be kind of explicit, like that is exactly what you should do. Whereas in muscle damage and muscle volumizing work, like if you're doing bodybuilding, body shaping, they might want you to increase your rep ranges, and that should be kind of specific. So it really depends on kind of what your desired outcome is. Are you trying to progress to heavier weight loads over the next, say 4 to 8 weeks, or are you trying to progress to heavier volume to increase like work capacity? So then all of a sudden later on, you could peak to a heavier kind of max load. So there's a lot of variance as to whether you would want somebody to push towards weight, push towards reps, or whatever. Maybe you want them to do shortened rest periods to increase aerobic capacity. So there should be some kind of very clear descriptions as to what to do from week to week in your workouts. So when you repeat the workouts from week to week, and if that's not listed, that is a sign of not necessarily having a great program. So a podcast you can listen to for more information about that is podcast 679. It's a training podcast titled How to Make Proper Weekly Progressions. So if your program doesn't have directions on how to do that, you can listen to podcast 679. So what I'm hopefully going to do today is, as we go through and identify problems in programs, if you see that your program has that problem, you can listen to the associated podcast and be able to fix it. So I hope that you can leave today knowing how to fix your programming if it does have some of these issues. The next thing we look at is progressions from cycle to cycle. And what I mean by this is if your program, say your workouts are supposed to last 4 weeks. Well, what do you do from one 4-week program to the next 4-week program to the next 4-week program is very important. Your programming should have a plan where over the course of multiple cycles of the program, it should be progressing to something. So, for example, if you have a powerlifting program and it's designed to have you peak twice a year for a competition, well, what you do month 1 should definitely impact and lead into what you do month 2, then month 3, then maybe you start peaking in month 4 and 5, and then you max out and do a meet, in month 6 or something like that. But what you should do from program to program, from cycle to cycle, is very, very important. There should be some kind of build-up or some type of cycling happening. So a lot of programming I do, even if they're just bodybuilders, I like to do a lot of overloading and underloading cycles and then volumizing cycles because it keeps it more interesting for me. I'll just be honest when I write the programming, so I'm not bored writing the programming. And it's going to get better progress for the client. So, of course, it's good for them. I'm not doing it just because I'm bored. But you could do it without it. Like, I could write the programs without it. But that's boring, and I don't want to write programs that way. And then also it's going to help the person get faster results, have more fun and excitement, more change up and differences between their programs by doing all these kind of different components. So I like it, they like it, so it's a good thing to have. Podcast 1259 is a Q&A podcast titled Periodization in Programming, and that'll kind of talk about that. The next thing is, how often do you change exercises? So, for example, the person who we initiatedly, like we explained in this podcast, their programming was set for 16 weeks. So for 16 weeks, they were supposed to do flat bench for 3 sets of 10, incline bench for 3 sets of 12, decline bench for 3 sets of 8, and then weighted dips for 3 sets of 6. And they're supposed to do that for 16 weeks and not have their elbows explode. Absolutely stupid. Ridiculous. So the coach who writes this program 100% doesn't give a shit about people, and I don't know how they would have sustained this program themselves, even with a ton of drugs. But it's just it's frustrating, and you can probably hear that in the way I'm explaining things right now. I get so mad because they're taking people's money, but they're hurting their emotions, and it's like, that's not, like, what are you doing this for? Why are you even in this business if you're going to do it to people? It's ridiculous. So there is a higher frequency in which you should change exercises. We actually explained that in podcast 1241. It's a training podcast titled How Often Should I Change Exercises? I believe in changing them every 4 weeks. That's a little bit fast. I understand that. But it really holds people back from getting like a lot of injuries or small annoyances. And then it keeps things more exciting for them. And then we get to learn a lot more movements and a greater variety of movements. And then also I get to make faster changes in programming to work on newly identified weaknesses. So I like it because I can get faster progress for them because I can continue to personalize things. Now, is it more work for me to write a brand new program for every single client for every 4 weeks? Hell yeah, it is. Like, rather than writing a brand new program every 8, 12, or 16 weeks, yes. But I didn't get into this business to do less work. I got into it because I want to make a difference. But I believe changing exercises every 4 weeks is great. I do have some circumstances where I might have a person cycle through the same movements for, say, 8 weeks, but they do them like every other week. So there's a lot of variances. There's even more variances than that in how often I do it. But I like having a higher frequency. I want the person to be able to do it enough to learn to be efficient in it. But once they become efficient, it's actually pretty good to move the hell on because the body starts to kind of cheat its positioning or cheat the effectiveness of the movement to try to get an extra little bit of pounds or to get an extra rep or two. So I'd like to get away from it before they starting into those cheating kind of components because that starts to accumulate joint annoyances, imbalance annoyances, and other issues. So the more often I can get them to change, but not so often they can't learn the movement, I get to avoid a lot of injury concerns with clients, which is great, and they love it, I love it. So those are things that really just any good program should have. That you don't even have to pay for it. It's just free programs should have those things. Then if you have to pay for it, it absolutely should be personalized to your schedule. So for example, if you can only train 4 days a week, that person should be able to write the program for 4 days a week. I have clients that train anywhere from 2 days a week to 7 days a week. And I write the programs exactly for them. So it's frustrating to me to hear that a coach wasn't willing to modify their programming, but yet they were still willing to take the money from the person. Very frustrating. But if you pay for programming, it should be personalized to your schedule. It should also be personalized to your equipment. So you shouldn't be getting a program that has machines in it that you don't have. So if you train at a home gym versus a commercial gym, that should absolutely be different programming. If you're in a home gym and you don't have a leg press, but your program writes in a leg press, it's not a personalized program. That's not very good. And then also, not all commercial gyms are the same. So I have, one client I just work with, he's over in the UK, and he switched gyms. I don't know where he was living first, but he was living somewhere. Then he moved to London, and he's at a new gym now. It doesn't have a few of the machines, like a bicep preacher curl machine, a lat pull down machine that we had in the previous gym, but it does have a pool. So this person's working through some injury rehab stuff. So we swapped out exercises for the machines he didn't have, and I wrote him 2 pool workouts because I thought it would be pretty cool for him to take advantage of the pool that he has access to. So you should absolutely, if you're paying for personalized programming, the programming should be personalized to the equipment that you have available. And it also should be personalized in regards to the exercises. So I have another guy I'm working with, and we were talking back and forth about like exercise, like arm exercises. So we started doing powerlifting specific. He had a hernia and hernia surgery, and he was unsure how to do powerlifting with a hernia. So he reached out. He had heard me through the podcast. He reached out. So we wrote a program for him for how he can still do powerlifting while having a hernia. And as we made great progress there, he's very happy with that. And he's like, well, you know what? I'd like to add a little bit of bodybuilding elements. And at first, we just communicated back and forth today a little bit about it. But he said he was really nervous and he was really struggling with the decision, do I do bodybuilding or do I do powerlifting? When he finally reached out to me and let me know that he had that struggle, I was like, what were you worried about? Like, we don't have to pick. You can do both. But he didn't know that you could do both. So I wrote the programming so where we could blend in bodybuilding components in with powerlifting. And then one of the aspects I changed was we have more arm isolation movements because he wanted to specifically bring up our arm size. And we were talking about, okay, well, if I do, for example, arm isolations before I do bench press, is that going to make my bench press weaker? And the general answer there, and I wrote a lot more detail to him, but the general answer is no, it won't, because we're looking for neurological stimulus and how heavy the bench press feels, not exactly how heavy it is. So if we do arm isolation work before the bench press, and it means like, okay, maybe he benches 5 pounds less than he normally would if he wouldn't have pre-fatigued his arms, that's okay. He's still going to get a ton of strength progression. 5 pounds isn't so significant in regards to like maximal weight load that it's going to negatively impact strength development. He's still going to get stronger, and now by having the arms pre-damaged muscle tissue wise before the bench press, he's going to get more arm damage out of the bench press. So the bench press actually becomes more of an arm exercise as well. And then we talked about how for him, he has long limbs, he has long upper arm bones, so it's even more important for him to do arm isolation work than somebody who has shorter upper arm bones, because if you have shorter upper arm bones, your arm muscles like the triceps, biceps, front shoulders, they tend to be kind of more involved in pushes and pulls than somebody who has long limbs. If you have long upper arms, you tend to rely more on the chest and the back in your chest and back exercises versus somebody with short limbs, short upper arms. So I was telling him that the frequency and the exercise selections were based off of not only do we want to create muscle damage before the big lifts, but he also has long limbs, like femur, like I don't know what the proper terminology is, but for the first limb out of a joint. So, for example, we don't care so much about his shin as much as we care about his femur when you're looking at like the muscles at the hip. Whereas if I'm looking at the muscles of the shoulder, I look at the upper arm bone, not so much the forearm bone. So it's the first limb after a joint. The length of that limb really has a significant impact on what muscles are worked when you do an exercise that uses that limb, that emphasizes the weight load within that limb. So we were talking through all that stuff, and it was fun for him to know, okay, here's all the reasons why we're having X amount of arm exercises in this position in the workout. We were even talking about different, productions, natural production of testosterone and growth hormone with a major heavy compound lift, even if it's pre-fatigued. So having it pre-fatigued, does that decrease growth hormone and testosterone response from the big heavy lifts? The answer is no, because we're not reducing it by a significant weight load effect. So I got way off track there, but the idea of this is if you're paying for a personalized programming, it should absolutely be personalized. There should be no doubt that program is for you. It has your schedule, your equipment, exercises are put in there and explained to be specific for you. So you should also get communication a hell of a lot more frequently than twice a month. That's ridiculous. So if you're paying for baseline, just kind of generic mass programming that is sold to you as everybody else who pays for this also gets the exact program, well, then they're not necessarily going to be personalization aspects, but there should be performance ranges for daily variances, meaning there should be rep ranges, percentage ranges, RPE, RIR. There should be, descriptions on how to progress from workout to workout, from cycle to cycle. There should be a frequent change in the movements. So we talked about that. Like they should change roughly every 4 to 8 weeks. If they go longer than that, I would argue that that's probably not a really good program. And then if you pay for it, you absolutely should have a lot more personalization on top of that. So hopefully today's discussion, I think I got way off track, but I think it was still good to hear some of these components that how do you know if you have a good programming is all of this stuff should be addressed in some way. If you have any issues, reach out. My email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. I'm always happy to look through programming. It's always fun to kind of learn and see what's out there in the world. So if you want me to look through something and give you some feedback, just let me know. Email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. I appreciate everybody who sends out emails and stuff. I try to respond within a week. So if you haven't got an answer back from me in the last couple days, give me about 7 days, and I usually get back to everybody. I try my best to. But I appreciate the emails. I love hearing from everybody. It's really motivational. So thank you very, very much. Cool. Well, if you like today's podcast or the podcast in general, please share it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people we can help. And that's the whole point of doing this. So thank you for listening and thank you for sharing. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, the people who financially support the podcast. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every day, and I would love to keep it for free. So I appreciate the patrons, the people who financially support the podcast, so that way it makes somewhat more financial sense to do this, and I love it. I really do love it. So I appreciate everybody who supports the podcast. We can continue to make this every day. So thank you very much. The options for donations are on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. You can do one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. I promise every penny of it goes right towards the fees. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your support. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and at YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.